It's Wednesday, it's 12:15 and we're live in Westminster. Joining me, Conservative peer and former Cabinet Minister Ed Vaizey, Labour leader in the Lords, Angela Smith, New Statesman contributing writer Paul Mason and Daily Telegraph columnist Madeline Grant. Today,
I would urge everybody in the country, get out and vote tomorrow. These are a very important set of elections.
We're on that mountain, we're climbing, and we're going into the elections tomorrow, fighting for every vote.
It's the last day of campaigning ahead of elections in England, Scotland and Wales.
The protocols around testing and, of course, self-isolating apply to all the summit.
But the Indian delegation in London for the G7 have been asked to self-isolate.
We're going to walk down to the Capitol.
After this, Donald Trump was removed from social media. He's launched his own website instead. And is there any chance of this returning? We're going to start with the story around the image you just saw there of the last royal yacht decommissioned in 1997. Now, the idea of building a new yacht has been floated rather forcefully by the Daily Telegraph. Reportedly would cost £200 million. Now, this is how the Scottish party leaders who took part in last night's election debate responded to the idea.
The royal yacht is a ludicrous idea.
A ludicrous idea.
It beggars belief. I'm not sure I could find a polite, broadcastable word.
That all the Conservatives have left is stunts.
I would look to see what the private investment is going to be, but I think from what I've heard...
It shouldn't come from public money.
Absolutely not.
So, Ed Vaizey, I can see you laughing away. They're not very popular in that studio. Would you like to defend it on Politics Live?
Yes, I would. I love this story. I could do the whole programme on it.
Well,
you're quite right. It started in the head of Madeline Grant's colleague, Christopher Hope, who is a great campaigner for things that he cares about. And he started it on the back of Brexit. And the sad death of the Duke of Edinburgh gave him a second win, as he now has suggested the royal yacht should be called the HMS Duke of Edinburgh. And on one level, it does appear to be a ludicrous idea. But actually, the more I think about it, the more I could get my head around it. Because I think that, first of all, we're good at building ships in this country. We've just built 2 state-of-the-art aircraft carriers. And if a royal yacht took off as a showcase for British talent, I could support it. For example, I don't want to upset Madeline by talking about climate change. It upsets the Daily Telegraph. But if it was a carbon-neutral yacht that showcased climate change technology where Britain could potentially be a world leader, that would be fantastic. And if there was some imagination in how it was designed, so, for example, it could become a hospital ship or a troop carrier if the circumstances dictated, that would be great. And finally, I am a big fan of soft diplomacy. You know, our aircraft carriers, which cost £3 billion, spend a lot of time entertaining foreign dignitaries when they're on patrol. I see nothing wrong with having our Prime Minister arrive in a fantastic plane and our trade ministers and our royal family arrive at a destination in a fantastic royal yacht. So despite the fact Christopher Hope dreamt this up in his bath, there is actually some merit in the idea.
Just to reassure viewers, we won't spend the whole programme talking about this, despite that wholehearted defence of it. There from Ed Vaizey. Angela, we're going to show pictures while you respond to the question about whether it's a ludicrous idea or whether you're on board, in fact, with it, and there perhaps should end the puns. We're going to show pictures of the last royal yacht. Angela.
Well, I'm sorry I can't see the pictures from here, but, you know, this is another one of Boris Johnson's ideas that sound very grandiose. Now, I'm a great believer in soft power, and this government has done more to damage British interests in using soft power than any other in living memory. But if you recall, Boris Johnson had the great idea of the Garden Bridge, and after £43 million of public money, it was deemed to be too risky to proceed. His other great grandiose idea was to build an airport in the middle of the Thames estuary between Kent and Essex, despite the fact it was over 1,400 tonnes of unexploded munitions from the Second World War. Now, I think a fitting tribute to Prince Philip, if we're building a ship, would be a ship for the Royal Navy. And I think that might find more favour across the country when we need more ships in our navy. But if it's genuinely an idea to increase our influence and our soft power across the world, I'd look at the proposals. But I suspect this is just another one of Boris Johnson's ideas that he loves to grapple with and never really delivers on.
Madeleine?
Well, Angela's quite right. Boris Johnson does love a bit of bread and circuses and great sort of grandstanding projects. But I don't think it's fair to categorise this potential ship as that kind of project, excuse the pun, literal showboating. It's previous the Royal Yacht Britannia was a great symbol of Britishness. It was known all over the world. Foreign dignitaries and, in terms of the aims of global Britain, business people, business leaders from around the world, investors, etc. The thought of being entertained on the Royal Yacht quite simply could open doors that a normal kind of reception simply cannot. And I think that when it was decommissioned and not replaced by under Tony Blair, they took a rather miserly sort of pound and pence view of how much it was going to cost. But the contribution of the yacht in terms of the soft power was absolutely enormous. I mean, it's very difficult to quantify these things, but I think that compared to the prestige it brought, it made a great contribution. And I do think in general that people have a tendency to underestimate the contribution that the royal family can make to UK PLC. And I think many will be pleasantly surprised just how much the new ship could help further the ambitions of global Britain.
Well, Paul, the Defence Minister, Ben Wallace, has indicated there are no immediate plans to build a new royal yacht. Does it float your boat or is it sunk before it started?
Well, if it does take off, I'm certain it'll become part of the overarching My Little Crony project, whereby the contract will go to one of the neighbours of a cabinet minister. But look, there might be merit in it. We have a royal flight. That flight doubles as a military command flight, and it flew, indeed, military personnel into Ukraine to advise the Ukrainian government during the last month's crisis. If we're going to have a taxpayer-funded thing that floats, its purpose should be primarily military. It's either, you don't get a hospital ship or anything else, to be honest, for 200 million. These days, it should be a support ship for the Royal Navy that can take the royal family in places. If they want a gin palace floating around, but remember we've got a royal family that insists it's going to slim itself down in the next generation. Why would they want a big thing floating around?
All right, let's talk about elections. It's the last full day of campaigning before polling day tomorrow, and a perfect opportunity to talk to Professor of Politics at Strathclyde University, John Curtis, and elections expert. Hello to you. An unusually big and widespread set of elections, John.
Indeed, because of the postponement of the English local elections last year, we've got a double dose of local elections this year. So just to quickly run through, we of course have devolved elections for the Senate and the Parliament in Cardiff and Edinburgh. We have the London mayoral election together with the Greater London Assembly. We've got 12 mayors being elected in England, some of them metro, some of them city. And we've got around 4,000 council seats up for grabs across about 130 or so councils. Oh, and we're also electing the police and crime commissioners for much of England and Wales. So it really is Super Thursday on Thursday for psephologists like me and doubtless for journalists like you too, Jo.
Oh, indeed. Something for everybody there. In terms of the biggest story, would you say that it is probably going to be around Scotland?
Well, of course, I'm biased in that respect, given that I live north of the border, but I think it's widely accepted that probably the election that's most likely to have consequence is the Scottish election because, of course, we're looking at the prospect of the next Scottish Parliament being populated with a majority of pro-independence MSPs and therefore pro-referendum MSPs, and that therefore there will be a constitutional clash between the Scottish government and the UK government at some point in the not too dim and distant future. But the thing perhaps on which we are particularly looking is whether or not the SNP can get an overall majority or not. That's 65 seats. We're looking at that because it was their ability to do that in 2011 that led the way to the 2014 independence referendum. And therefore, it's going to be rather more difficult for the UK government simply to say no if the SNP can say, well, look, you know, it was good enough 10 years ago for a referendum, why isn't it good enough now? Now, you're going to ask me, are they going to make it? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. We've had 5 polls out in the last 24 hours. 4 of them pretty optimistic for the SNP, suggesting that probably they will just make it, but one saying, no, actually, the SNP is going to fall back. But we all agree that basically it's somewhere between 63/64 for the SNP and 67/68. That small difference could, however, politically make a very important difference to Nicola Sturgeon's future, the SNP's future, and indeed the future of the UK.
Right, well, let's talk briefly about the futures of Keir Starmer and Boris Johnson. How much is this going to be a test of their leaderships?
It's going to be a test for both of them, but no more than 10 days ago, so far as England at least was concerned, this was looking like a really good set of elections for Boris Johnson. 8-point lead in the polls. That would certainly mean that as compared with those elections that were last fought in 2016, which is nearly half the seats, that the Conservatives would make gains because at that stage 5 years ago, the two parties were roughly neck and neck. And yes, the Conservatives would be losing some ground as compared with the local elections in 2017, where the seats were last fought there, because then there was about a 20-point Tory lead in the polls. On balance, you know, the Conservatives would be able to say, you know, doing remarkably well for a government in power. Now, given that expectation, however, given that that poll lead has narrowed, maybe we'll now end up with a set of results that are rather closer to 2016 than Boris Johnson would like. That said, unless the Labour Party does better than it does in the polls, the Labour Party is not going to be doing so well in these sets of local elections, which, of course, are Keir Starmer's first, than Jeremy Corbyn did in his, because Jeremy Corbyn's first local elections were in 2016. He was roughly even Stevens with the Conservatives. And at the moment, at least, even with the narrowing of the Conservatives' poll lead, Labour are still well short of that. And put it like this, given that the principal aim of Keir Starmer's leadership is meant to be to do better electorally than Jeremy Corbyn, this could still be quite a sticky wicket for the leader of the opposition.
Well, John Curtis there, thank you very much. You've got a long few days ahead of you and not much sleep, I suspect, and probably see you soon. Let's just show our panellists, or in fact I will tell the panellists since they can't see it, but our viewers, the headline in The Times, which is around the Hartlepool by-election. Labour left says Keir Starmer should quit if more of Red Wall falls. Paul, what's your reaction to that headline?
Well, I think actually it's not what the article says. The article says that he should think about quitting in a year's time if things don't improve. And I just think there is no left challenge to Keir Starmer. There's lots of people sort of meandering around, grumbling about him. But there's nobody prepared on the left of the PLP to stand up and say we have an alternative. So Starmer is where the party's at. I think success for Starmer tomorrow would be coming second in Scotland, and growing the party's vote share in the Hartlepool by-election and holding on to some councils. That would be actually a very cheerful night for Labour if they could do all of those three things. But that is not the makings of a government. The problem he has is that without the left, I mean, the left might grumble, but it is the majority of the party membership, with the left feeling out in the cold, unloved, dissed, to be honest. There's no enthusiasm for what he's doing. And so I think if he falls short of what I've just said, there will be a few days of recriminations in which he's got to think very carefully about changing, to be honest, what he does.
Right. I mean, Angela, first set of elections since Keir Starmer has become leader. Do you agree with Paul that he will have to change if the results are less than they're expecting at the moment? I mean, with Hartlepool, he said, I take full responsibility for the Hartlepool by-election. What did he mean?
Well, Keir is somebody who always steps up to the plate and takes responsibility as Labour leader. But I think for those of us on the doorstep, our comparison really is less with 2016, which the seats we're defending, or more with 2019. And it's probably no exaggeration, I have to be honest, we were absolutely gutted in 2019. They were the worst results for the Labour Party in my lifetime. I think they're probably the worst in almost living memory. I think go back to the 1930s to see such bad results. So some of the results we see as a result of Keir's leadership taking us into these elections will be tangible in terms of the kinds of things Paul was talking about as gains made in seats and how things are looking. The other side of it is less tangible. And one thing that has struck me is in 2019, I was knocking on doors and asking people to vote Labour. And in many cases, even those that were voting Labour were hostile to us. And so you don't bounce back from that easily. And what struck me in these elections are people wanting to talk, want to listen to you. And we've got to show not just that we've changed, but we're listening to people and responding to that and earning their trust. So it's quite a mountain, but don't underestimate the challenge that we've had here. And to me, as Keir says, there is a mountain, but we are climbing that mountain.
Paul?
Well, that's true. I think that's right. That's my feeling as well. I got the door slammed in my face by Labour voters in 2019, both pro and anti-Brexit. But the point is that, you know, we're in a period where politics is very dominated by cultural identity. And we see that in Scotland. We see that on the right of politics in places like Hartlepool and elsewhere, Teesside in general. And Labour just hasn't yet come up with the formula to create a narrative that draws together these two big tribes that should be supporting it. The small town, ex-industrial working class communities that I come from, and the big city, cosmopolitan working class community that I live in here in South London. They're just on different pages. And Starmer's leadership so far has not found the formula for bringing them together around a common project.
Angela?
Well, I think we're still getting people to listen to us. I sort of disagree with Paul in many ways, in that, is there a common project? No, but there is a set of values and ideals that are the same if you're in South London or in Hartlepool or Middlesbrough or the North East. You want this country to be a different kind of country coming out of the pandemic. You want to see more fairness in society. You want better opportunities for your children. You know, when my parents were having me and, you know, we were in East London, what kept them going and encouraged them always to vote Labour was that sense of optimism for what Labour can provide. And the great challenge for the Labour Party is that people listen to us and recognise that we can provide that, and we can provide that optimism, and we can deliver on it. But the challenge in this election is to get people to listen to us. They can see we're starting to make that change from the hostility you got in 2019 to actually saying that we can be a party of government. And some of that will be tangible and some is not tangible. But if you're knocking on the doors and you're talking to people, you're feeling that change happening.
Is that going to be enough, Paul?
It's good. It's not nothing. Absolutely. I think many people on all wings of the party underestimate the extent to which the actual party brand has been, in the marketing speak, trashed by the repeated turnover of leaderships. You know, 1 minute it's Ed Miliband, before that it's Blair, next it's Corbyn, now it's Starmer. And people are right to us, well, what does it stand for, this party? I do think both me and Angela worked on Keir's campaign. I continue to support him. I do think the problem is that we need to move towards concrete offers. You know, Joe Biden has laid out a very, very clear template for what I think Labour should be doing. It's a fiscal stimulus of about 10% of GDP, which will be borrowed. And I think until Labour commits to something like that, it's not really got a story that's distinctive enough to tell people.
Right, well, we've been talking about the Red Wall, Ed, and Boris Johnson's repeated promise of levelling up in order to hold on to those parts of the country that were won by the Conservatives in 2019. But actually, in reality, the white paper on it that's been promised by government isn't happening until the autumn. So it's still a blank piece of paper. How big a risk is that in people's minds in these elections?
Well, I don't think it's a risk in these elections. I think the narrative of these elections is pretty clear, and it looks like it will be played out tomorrow if Labour do lose Hartlepool and if we hold on to, for example, the West Midlands mayor, which I'm sure we will do in others. And I think the fact, and I'm not saying this as a sort of partisan point, but the fact that you spent time with Paul and Angela discussing the future of Labour means I think that as a sort of objective analysis, the outcome of the local elections is likely to shift the focus onto Labour's leadership. But to your point, I think is a valid point. Prime Minister just appointed Neil O'Brien as the sort of levelling up czar. And I've always said consistently that one of the things about the Red Wall seats going Conservative is it will change the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party is partly changed because of Brexit. Brexit is reshaping the political landscape. But these new MPs who didn't expect to be MPs and who come from their local communities and who are not, dare I say it, career Tory politicians, will hold the government to account and will shape the agenda. So yes, at the moment, I don't think it affects the local elections, but yes, mid to long term, the government does have to deliver the promises it's making to the red wall seats.
Right, but you're right. I did focus with Paul and Angela, obviously, on Labour. But what about these elections being a referendum on allegations of impropriety and possible corruption about Boris Johnson's leadership?
I don't think they are. I think the narrative is pretty clear to me, looking at the polls, and I don't have any inside information, but the narrative is pretty clear that Brexit has fundamentally caused a schism between the traditional Labour voters and the Labour Party. They have gone to the Conservatives. If we win Hartlepool tomorrow, it will be because the Brexit Party, partly because we lost a lot of votes to the Brexit Party, that is what is dictating this narrative. I don't think the voters are focused on Flatgate or anything else. I think this is still a hangover.
Well,
hangover may be the wrong word, but this is still, as it were, the momentum from the Brexit election victory in 2019. I'm saying that as political analysis. I'm not trying to score political points here. I just think that is what is happening on the ground.
Yeah, but you're coming from it from a certain prism, let's just be clear.
Yeah.
I mean, Madeleine, really, is it not going to have gained any traction at all? All the conversations and allegations around the redecoration of the Downing Street flat in these election or voters' minds?
Well, it's very hard to say. I must say that of my colleagues and others who've been reporting on the ground, and they haven't reported it as an issue that's come up repeatedly. To use that awful phrase, it doesn't seem to have had that kind of cut through that many, I think, in Westminster were expecting. Of course, we'll wait to see. But I think that Ed's right in the sense that the narrative is much bigger than this. And really, I think it's almost a kind of referendum on the question of whether the political realignment, which was sort of Brexit has catalysed and sparked, will still be meaningful after that political goal has been achieved. And judging by the polls, that does seem to be the way that it's going to go.
Angela, you're shaking your head.
I am, yes. I think that to try and see this election just in terms of Brexit is rather sort of missing the point. My experience of issues like the sleazy stuff we've seen and the allegations about contracts and PPE not being available is that these issues tend to be rather slow burn. And the government thinks, oh, great, I've got away with something. But each time it chips away at their authority and their integrity. It may not play into these elections, but people don't forget these things. And I think a lot of the electioneering in this election has been very difficult because it's not a year like any of us have ever known before in our history. The vaccine is creating, quite rightly, a mood of optimism thanks to the fantastic delivery from the National Health Service. So I don't necessarily see this in terms of Brexit, because to suggest it's a success when we've got the problems in Northern Ireland, the problems we've seen in Jersey, there's a lot of issues that still remain unresolved that need to be dealt with. So I just think this is an unusual election. For us, it's after such a heavy defeat. But I think we're going to see progress for the Labour Party.
All right.
I don't think the country is as gripped by election fever as we are, if I'm honest.
Ed, you were trying to come in?
I don't think it's a Brexit election in the sense that people are going to the polls saying Brexit's been a stunning success. I think Brexit has fundamentally realigned British politics, and it may play out over 5, 10, 20 years. We're not talking about London, where Labour presumably think they will do well. But we are talking about the north of England, where there has been a distinct shift, which I think, as Madeleine put it, has been catalysed by Brexit. I'm not saying voters are going to the polls now to vote on Brexit. They're going to the polls because that created the break with Labour that allows them to vote Conservative.
Well, let me get Paul's take on that idea of realignment post-Brexit.
Well, first of all, you can't categorise the North as a single place. And in fact, it's not even the whole North. I mean, I would be looking, we don't want to talk about candidates and specifics here, but I would be looking at edge places in the big cities, for example, where I think it's acknowledged that Labour is in the lead. What happens there? But my disagreement with Angela is simply that I think cultural identity is now playing stronger in politics than economic interest. However, I mean, with the cronyism and the corruption and the scandal that is surrounding Boris Johnson and is not going away, where I think it's beginning to filter, in my experience, is into, and remember, the Daily Mail is pushing a lot of it. It's into that demographic that we sometimes disparagingly call white van man. White van man pays their taxes. They do their own taxes. They have an accountant. They know what it's like to bid for a contract and be pipped for that contract by somebody's mate. That's the world they live in. And I think it matters a lot to those of us. I'm a self-employed journalist. Those of us who have to do that day in, day out, the kind of ducking and weaving you have to do as a small business, look at the way Johnson and his team of cronies have operated in this crisis and think, hold on a minute, that could be affecting me. And especially if we're in a world where backhanders, known as levelling up funds, are being given out to places, for example, in Yorkshire, that are not that poor, on the grounds that they have a Tory MP who happens to be the Chancellor. I mean, that's where people start thinking, hold on a minute, whatever I feel about immigration, etc., there might be something in this problem that we're being ruled by a bunch of crooks.
All right. Well, before we move on, I'm just going to show our viewers the list of candidates, a long list of candidates for the Hartlepool by-election, as we spent quite a bit of time talking about it. And before we end this part of the programme, just to get you to share your earliest political memory. Madeleine, they've been sharing it on Twitter ahead of the elections tomorrow. What's yours?
Well, so I grew up in the 90s in a sort of countryside Tory voting household, and my parents were not big fans of New Labour. So I think mine is probably going into primary school and telling everyone that Tony Blair was a bad man, despite not really knowing who Tony Blair was, which is I guess it's a testament to the power of brainwashing from an early age.
Ah, well, there you go. Truthful and candid. What about you, Paul? I'm sure that wasn't yours.
I wish mine were funny, but it's age 5 or something like that, involuntarily glimpsing the footage of the liberation of Bergen-Belsen. My mum is from a Jewish background and was with me. And, you know, it led to a very frank and good discussion for a young child about what was going on and what had gone on for my parents' generation in the war. And so, yeah, that was a political memory, and it has stuck with me forever.
Yes, I'm sure. Ed?
My dad filling my brother's bedroom with pro-European referendum leaflets for the 1975 referendum. And I remember playing with the leaflets, but at that point, you know, I was probably 6 or 7. The politics entering my head as something that was happening around me.
Yes, became important many decades later. Angela?
The stickers.
Mine was actually my parents going to vote. We were always told you must vote. It was a very important thing to do. My mum would wait for dad to come home from work. It must have been 64, the 66 election. I'll give my age away now. And and even later now, I think it's a really good thing if parents take their children to the polling stations with them. So it's not mysterious. They can vote later. But it is going with mum and dad to see them vote in the 64, 66 election, and a good result it was too.
Thank you for sharing all of those, panel. Let's talk about this. I'm just going to show our viewers this tweet from Priti Patel, the Home Secretary. She is welcoming there in the picture Dr. Jai Shankar, the External Affairs Minister for India. But this is just as the news, that was yesterday, this is as the news broke today, that the Indian delegation is now self-isolating because a couple of the delegation have tested positive for COVID. We also heard from the Vaccines Minister Nadeem Zahawi today saying that more international travel, more details around that will definitely be announced at the end of this week, including some more detail around the traffic light system. So we may soon be able to go abroad to see family or go on foreign travel, foreign holidays. But should we? Is it responsible to do so? Madeleine, you've written a piece today entitled "There's Nothing Immoral About Foreign Holidays." There's the headline for our viewers. What are you saying?
Well, what I tried to argue is that I think the discussion that we've been having, I mean, my piece mentions holidays, but the discussion about international travel, I think, has become a bit sort of parochial. You know, we keep talking about holidays and the implication being that foreign travel is a kind of luxury that we can do without indefinitely. But I think for one thing, this overlooks in a massive way how many British citizens have significant family abroad. And so for them, the closure of international travel means missing out on basic family life. And it would obviously be crazy to open the doors without proper testing, without proper quarantine restrictions immediately to countries that have high levels of the virus. But I think that at present there is a level of caution that seems to fail to recognise, for example, the success of our vaccination programme. I gave the example of the cruise ship industry, which is, it takes, I'm very glad that there's going to be some further detail from ministers coming soon, because international tourism is a kind of very complex, vast ecosystem that it takes months, not weeks or days, to kind of plan ahead for when you could reopen things. And there's been so much dithering. Nicola Sturgeon hasn't even set out for Scottish citizens what the situation will be at all. Something like cruise ships, you have to prepare for a voyage, you would have to hire staff, order supplies, plan the overseas trips.
Yes.
All of that stuff. And I think right now the attitude has been kind of that tourism and travel, which employs, creates billions for the UK economy and employs hundreds of thousands of people, is something that you can just kind of switch on and off like a tap at will,
Well, I mean, Paul, are we in a situation, or getting close to a situation, where we will be allowed to travel abroad again, perhaps next month, but we're sort of being told, or there is a sense that it wouldn't be moral necessarily to do so?
Well, I hope we aren't, because for me, the lockdowns, I mean, we're in our second decompression period now, aren't we? And we need to learn from the first one. I think that if you're in lockdown, it should be hard, it should be preemptive, we should try and kill the spread of the virus. And when you're out of it, we need to revert to that thing that people are learning about and studying right now in their politics A levels, freedom to do things. That is, we are presumed free to do what the heck we want once there are no restrictions. And I think, there are other reasons to say long-term foreign travel, is not very sustainable, and that's climate change. I think the cost of it is going to rise. The cost of it is already going to be difficult for people who are going to have these tests. I can remember last summer I went on a work trip to Berlin. It cost me 250 quid to just get a test. So there's already a class thing developing here. But let's not kid ourselves as well. There are implicit sort of restrictions on where we can go inside our own country.
Right.
I mean, I have a caravan in Wales. I couldn't get to it until mid-April, quite rightly. But in other words, once the constraints come off, let them come off completely.
Right, OK. I mean, Ed, it's interesting. We started with the story about the Indian delegation. I mean, is that a salutary reminder that actually, yes, we can do these things, and that was perhaps the first face-to-face summit, but was it wise?
Yeah, I think it is a salutary reminder. That's exactly what I was thinking when you were talking about it, because I'm pretty sort of gung-ho and I would like to see restrictions lifted. And I think the government has handled this extremely well with clear dates and clear markers of success. But we are all expecting to be able to travel abroad relatively freely after June the 21st. And I agree with Madeleine. I think that people should be allowed to travel if they can. But clearly, the fact is that in some countries where COVID is really hitting them hard, they do potentially present a risk, people coming from those countries, whether it's India, Brazil, or others, because although the vaccine appears to be incredibly effective and has worked amazing wonders in this country, we don't know the effect of new strains, and we don't know what unrestricted travel could bring. So I think we do have to be cautious, but I think most of us would expect potentially to be able to go abroad in Europe, for example. And I would support vaccine passports or some kind of identifier that says either you're ancient like me and you've therefore had the vaccines, or you're young and therefore don't, as it were, need the vaccine. I don't see anything infringing kind of human rights on that. I think we use a passport to go abroad anyway. I don't see there's anything wrong with having something that identifies whether or not you're at risk.
Angela?
I think there's a difference between vaccine passports for international travel and vaccine passports domestically. But I think the G7 today, and seeing we've got two of the Indian delegation in isolation because they tested positive, is a reminder. And I was just looking at the figures, about 15,000 people coming to the UK, about 1% are quarantined. And the fact is that none of us are safe, really, till everybody's safe. And that shows why it's important that we work internationally to ensure that everybody gets the vaccine, and we can see the success it has here. So I think we all want to travel, whether it's in the country or abroad. And for some people, it is still a luxury to travel abroad, although I don't disagree a lot of what Madeleine had to say. And thank you, Madeleine, for the plug for Bognor Regis as a great place to visit, which where I am at the moment, although it's starting to rain. So yeah, it's one of these things. It's getting the balance right, isn't it? And I think it all comes from all of us are desperate to get us as close to normal as we possibly can, as quickly as possible and as safely as possible. The lockdown has been hard on so many people,
yes,
but I think most people are more focused if they can go down to their local pub for a drink, have dinner with their friends, meet up with families, than they are at the moment about international travel.
All right, let's leave it there. We're going to talk about this. Let me show you this headline story in the BBC. Facebook Oversight Board to rule on Trump account ban. That's the news that Facebook is expected to announce today whether or not Donald Trump's ban from the social media platform will be upheld. In the meantime, the former US president has already taken matters into his own hands because today he's launched a new website for his supporters. Let's take a look.
Consign him and those who supported him in the Senate to the trash heap of history.
Twitter permanently banning the commander-in-chief's personal account with 88 million followers.
OK, it ended there with a beacon of freedom arises. For you, the panel, who can't actually see it, but I hope you've got the sense of that. Angela, should Donald Trump be allowed back on social media?
I think he's now trying to find a way around it, isn't he, by having his own sort of rather antiquated website.
But would you like him back on all the traditional platforms?
Absolutely not. I think what we saw and his reaction to losing the election, he's has a very sort of casual relationship with the truth. He's got millions of people believing that he really won the election. And I think that is dangerous for democracy. It's dangerous for safety and it's dangerous for common sense. So there is a responsibility on the social media platforms. You don't want to deny people genuine access. And one of the great things about social media is it opens up to a wider audience and to wider contributors for comment and opinion. But there has to be some relationship with the truth and not to the kind of incitement we saw to the demonstrations leading up to the inauguration of Joe Biden.
Right. I mean, Ed, are you completely comfortable with some sort of round table at Facebook making the decisions about either world leaders or former world leaders being allowed on their platform?
Well, I'm not sure Facebook's entirely comfortable with it, although actually I do applaud them setting up this oversight board. It's the biggest sort of step forward in terms of transparent regulation, self-regulation, if you like. We've got the online safety bill coming to Parliament. It'll probably be announced in the Queen's speech, and that's going to be a very, very big change in tech regulation led by the UK and managed by Ofcom. And I think they're going to be, some interesting debates. I mean, I think fundamentally the point about Trump's being banned is that people recognise that the platforms have too much power. They can make, as it were, these life or death decisions, and people like Donald Trump live or die by social media. And most people, I think, would accept that having government effectively, representing citizens, having a say in how that regulation takes place is important and long overdue. So I support the principle of the online safety bill. There will be lots of debate about it, and one of the big debates will be that spectrum between taking down harmful content and protecting the right to express yourself and freedom of expression, even if it's incredibly annoying or provocative.
Right, but is there a consistent approach, Paul? Because Facebook and Twitter currently have rules that give world leaders and elected officials greater latitude than ordinary users. But, are you worried that that might change, or that there is an inconsistency in terms of the approach to other world leaders that some people would think, for example, Bolsonaro, Brazil's president, making inappropriate remarks?
Well, look, this question of who has the right to limit speech or to allow speech or to platform speech in the 21st century is one of the key questions we're going to face. And it isn't just state and therefore civil society versus big corporations. The big corporations themselves have business models that are actually at odds. So Apple is in a big battle with Facebook over privacy, for example, at the moment. For me, the solution is for we, the people, to take control of this through government. Governments need to have the final say. This oversight board, for example, is a sham. I mean, it's not. I welcome its setting up because it's better than nothing, but it is a sham. We need media regulation. It needs to be quite tough. For example, it's interesting, isn't it, that at no stage did the British authorities, Ofcom, ever think it might be within their power to limit the avalanche of hate speech that emanating from Trump and his supporters into British civil society. We do it with, quite rightly, with Daesh. We do it with fascists. But you know, why haven't we got powers? I hope we do take powers to limit the spread of hate speech and incitement, whoever it comes from.
Madeleine?
Well, it's very difficult. I wouldn't know how you'd begin to go about doing that in practice because it would be so complicated. But I do feel that the relationship that currently exists is deeply unhealthy, and I don't think it's sustainable. You know, in the old days, the traditional justification for the existence of these powerful big tech monopolies was that, you know, if you don't like them, then you can go somewhere else. But I don't think that argument stands up any longer when the platforms can and do often use their monopoly advantages to destroy competition. You know, we saw a good example of this recently after millions of people downloaded the app Parler. After having been removed from other platforms. And then Amazon, Apple and Google basically joined forces to see it removed from the App Store. Now, they say that they would have done that for good social justice reasons. And there were clearly, you know, there will be some dangerous people on the Parler app. But there's also that element of trying to suppress the competition. You know, we're in a weird position where platforms are able to claim that they're committed to free speech. At the same time, they kind of behave like publishers where they determine what gets published. So they're kind of playing the philosopher kings to the nation, but they're not regulated as publishers would be. So I just, you know, that position is clearly unsustainable.
Paul?
Well, you know, Germany has an anti-fascist law, and we, as the British allies, helped write it. And it does allow the German government to stop hate speech and to place people who advocate violence under surveillance. I'm in favour of what a German political philosopher in the 30s called militant democracy. If we're going to defend democracy against, I mean, let's remember Trump incited an insurrection in which 5 people died and the US Capitol was invaded. There has to be, you know, if the state doesn't do it, then as Madeleine suggests, what we're doing is we're privatizing the job of governance to a bunch of people who are only interested in making money. You know, that's what they're set up to do, corporations, and don't have the best interests of the whole people at heart. So I think, difficult as it is, it's only states that can sort this out. I think the European Union is going to get ahead of us unless we act faster.
An anti-fascist law, Angela, would that get your support?
I think when we get the online harms bill or online safety bill into Parliament, there's going to be a huge debate about this. I think Paul's hit the nail on the head, deciding where that line is. But the kind of hate and vitriol that has been targeted towards individuals and institutions from some of the social media platforms is not in the interest of democracy at all. It damages individuals, it damages our very institutions, and it undermines those institutions, as we saw in America. So I think how we can combat that, whatever we call it, that extremism has no place when it's undermining our democracy and our institutions. And government does have a responsibility. We've waited too long for this bill already. I'm very interested to see what the proposals are, and we'll have to judge them on that basis, but we need to move forward very quickly.
We haven't got long, but Ed.
We're essentially talking about the regulation of tech, where the UK is leading the way, the European Commission is looking at it, and now the Biden administration is. All I would counsel people is to say, don't try and frame your laws because you hate Donald Trump. We need laws that work for everyone, that take down harmful content, but also protect free expression.
All right, that's all we've got time for. Thank you to all of my guests. As I said, it's the last full day of campaigning, polling day tomorrow. I will be back on Monday with Politics Live at 12:15. Please join me then. Bye-bye.